In the early hours of the 14th of June, 2017, a fire began in a kitchen on the 4th floor of a 24-story tower block in West London. Within minutes, it was outside the building. Within 12 minutes, it had climbed 19 stories. By dawn, the entire tower was burning. 72 people died. The fire did not spread because of the fridge that started it. The manufacturer and the resident were both cleared of wrongdoing. The fire spread because of what had been wrapped around the outside of the building the year before. And the people who chose that material had been warned. Not in vague terms. In test results, in failed experiments, in internal emails marked confidential. The danger was documented years before a single panel went up on Grenfell Tower. This is not a story about an accident. It is a story about a decision that was made cheaply and the warnings that were buried so it could stay cheap. Start with the building. Grenfell Tower was built in the 1970s in North Kensington. By contrast, it stood in the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, the wealthiest borough in London, where the average home costs well over £1 million. The tower itself was social housing. In 2016, it was given a refurbishment, partly to improve its appearance and its energy efficiency. The centerpiece of that work was a new external skin, cladding panels fixed to the outside of the concrete. The panels chosen were a type known as ACM, aluminium composite material. 2 thin sheets of aluminium with a core sandwiched between them. On Grenfell, that core was polyethylene, plastic. It is worth being plain about what that means. The building was wrapped in panels with a plastic filling, and plastic burns. Why choose it? The honest answer runs through almost everything that follows. It was cheap. The refurbishment had a budget, and money drove the decisions. The contractor, Ryden, found that choosing the ACM panels over a safer non-combustible alternative such as zinc could save a significant sum. When a subcontractor's cost estimate turned out to be wrong, the firm rearranged the finances so the error would not eat into its profit. One commercial manager described the result in an internal email with a single phrase. The company would be, in his words, quids in, more profit. That was the priority being protected while a combustible material was selected for a residential tower. This is the decision at the heart of the disaster. But the channel's question is always the same. Was it foreseeable? Did anyone know? They knew. And the record of that knowledge stretches back years before Grenfell was ever touched. Begin the pattern in 2005. The firm that manufactured the aluminium composite material panels, Arconic, had seen one of its products fail fire safety testing in France. Not once, on multiple occasions. The cassette version of the panel, folded so the fixings stay hidden, performed worse in fire than other methods. And the company had data showing it. Move to 2010. An internal email from one of Arconic's own managers, later uncovered by the public inquiry, showed the firm was aware of the test data and wanted it kept as very confidential. The product kept selling for years afterward. There were warnings inside the United Kingdom too. The Building Research Establishment, a body that tests construction materials, had carried out its own fire test even earlier. The results were alarming. They were shared with the government. They were not shared with the building industry that needed them most. And the warnings were not only about the cladding manufacturers. The insulation behind the panels came from other firms, Celotex and Kingspan. The inquiry would later find that combustible products had been sold using fire test data that had been manipulated. The market was being told these materials were safer than the makers knew them to be. So before Grenfell, the picture was already complete. A product known to fail fire tests, a manufacturer asking for the evidence to be kept quiet, a government body sitting on its own, alarming results. An industry sold safety claims built on manipulated data. The materials were a disaster waiting for a building. Grenfell became the building. But there is a second pattern, and it runs through the building itself. 26 years before the fire, another tower block, this one in Liverpool, had caught fire with flames running up combustible cladding. Nobody died that time. The inquiry would later call it one of many missed chances for the government to recognize the danger and act. It did not act. And the warnings came from inside Grenfell itself. Residents had raised serious safety concerns about their own building. Fire extinguishers with the word "condemned" written on the side, lifts that did not work. These were not vague worries, they were specific and they were documented. In November of 2016, months before the fire, a resident group wrote a blog post. They warned that it would take a serious fire and the loss of life in a building managed by their landlord before anything would be done about how their homes were maintained. That prediction came true in almost exactly the way they described. The landlord was the borough's tenant management organization. It had already been accused of a culture of concealment after a previous fire in the building in 2015 found to have hidden key fire safety information from its own board and treated the issue as an inconvenience. Every layer that should have caught this had been warned in writing and had failed. Now the night itself told with restraint. The fire reached the cladding within minutes and began climbing the eastern face. Flames moved up, then sideways across the tower. Inside, residents faced a policy called "stay put." In most high-rise buildings, stay put is sound advice. The buildings are designed so a fire stays contained in one flat. The single narrow staircase makes mass evacuation difficult, so residents are told to stay in their homes, close their doors, and wait to be rescued. But stay put only works if the building contains the fire. Grenfell no longer did. The fire was racing up the outside, bypassing the very containment the policy depended on. The order to abandon stay put and tell residents to get out did not come until nearly 2 hours after the fire began. The first major report found that decision came far too late. There were no sprinklers. The fire doors gave roughly half the protection they were supposed to. One survivor on the 16th floor had been told to stay put and intended to. Then, a neighbor who had already escaped called and shouted at him to get out. He made it to the stairwell, lost his way in smoke so thick he could not see his own hand, and was found on the floor by a firefighter crawling through the dark. 223 people escaped. 72 did not. Almost half of those who died were disabled people and children. The investigation that followed was vast. The final inquiry report ran to 1,700 pages, and it did not soften its findings. It concluded that the people who lived in the tower had been failed over many years by those responsible for their safety. The list of those responsible was extraordinary in its length. The government, the borough council, the tenant management organization, the architect, the contractors, the firms that supplied and certified the materials. On the manufacturers, the report was blunt. It found that Celotex had misled its customers and the wider market. It said that Kingspan had, in its words, cynically exploited the industry's lack of detailed knowledge. It found that Arconic had deliberately concealed the true extent of its product's dangers. Not all bore equal blame. The report said most contributed through incompetence, but some acted through dishonesty and greed. And in the aftermath, the inquiry's lead lawyer described what he saw among the companies involved. A merry-go-round of buck passing, a spider's web of blame, each firm trying to point at another. So what has changed? ACM cladding of the kind used on Grenfell has been banned on new high-rise homes in the UK since late 2018. The Building Safety Act of 2022 gave residents stronger rights and meant leaseholders no longer had to pay to strip unsafe cladding from their own homes. New regulators and tougher oversight of how building products are tested and sold have been promised. The government accepted the findings of the inquiry and pledged action on all 58 of its recommendations. But the warning that defines Grenfell is that warnings are slow to become safety. Years on, thousands of buildings still carried dangerous cladding. Government data identified roughly 2,000 social housing buildings not yet fixed, and hundreds with no plan in place at all. A national audit found the pace of the work too slow. Leaseholders described lives put on hold, unable to sell, fighting through tribunals, one calling his experience Kafkaesque. Another called his own building a death trap, the same words the tower's residents had used before the fire. The fire that started in Flat 16 was an accident, almost nothing after it was. The danger of the cladding was tested and known. The manufacturer's own emails asked for the evidence to be hidden. A government body held alarming results and did not pass them on. A council in the richest borough in London chose the budget option. Residents wrote down, months ahead, almost exactly what was coming. Every one of those was a warning, recorded, dated, and ignored. The failure was not that nobody saw it coming. The failure was that they did. If you want to keep following the warnings the world ignored, subscribe. Every disaster leaves a paper trail. We follow it.